Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he walked through the crowded corridors of mining station Delta 9. His 12-hour shift in the asteroid belt had left him exhausted, and all he wanted was a hot meal and 8 hours of sleep, before doing it all over again tomorrow. The station hummed with the usual noise of machinery and hundreds of conversations in different languages as humans and aliens went about their business in this remote corner of space. He stopped at the market to buy protein bars and water bottles for tomorrow when he first noticed her. She stood near the large viewport that looked out at the stars, and her appearance made him pause for a second. Her skin was the color of Earth oceans and seemed to shimmer under the harsh station lights. Long silver hair fell past her shoulders, like liquid metal, and her eyes glowed with a soft purple light that seemed unnatural even for an alien. She wore the standard gray visitor jumpsuit that all non-residents had to wear, but something about the way she stood perfectly still while watching him made the hair on his neck stand up. Jake grabbed his supplies and headed for the checkout, trying to ignore the feeling of being watched. When he glanced back, she was gone. He shook his head and told himself he was being paranoid because of too many double shifts and not enough real food. Space did weird things to your mind if you let it. Next morning, Jake sat in the cafeteria with his friend Carlos, who worked the same mining crew. They were eating the usual breakfast of synthetic eggs and processed meat that tasted like cardboard, but provided the necessary nutrients for hard labor in zero-gravity environments. "Man, you look like hell," Carlos said between bites of toast. "You sleeping okay, or is the insomnia hitting you again?" Jake started to answer when he saw her again. The blue-skinned woman sat 3 tables away, and this time there was no mistaking that she was staring directly at him. Her purple eyes never blinked, and her expression was completely neutral, like she was studying him, the way scientists studied specimens in a lab. Carlos noticed Jake had stopped mid-sentence and turned to follow his gaze. "Who is that?" he asked, lowering his voice. "Never seen her species before, and I thought I knew all the regular aliens on this station." "No idea," Jake muttered and forced himself to look away and finish his breakfast. "But she was watching me yesterday at the market too, and now she is here." "Maybe she likes you," Carlos joked, but his smile faded when he saw Jake was genuinely uncomfortable. "Want me to go talk to her and find out what her deal is?" "No, just leave it," Jake said and stood up to dump his tray. "She is probably just new to the station and curious about humans or something. Some aliens still find us fascinating since we are relatively new to space travel compared to them." But as Jake left the cafeteria, he could feel those purple eyes following him. He walked faster than normal to the equipment bay where miners suited up for their shifts. His hands shook slightly as he checked his oxygen levels and tested his helmet seals. This was not normal behavior even for curious aliens, and Jake had been around enough different species to know when something was off. The shift passed slowly as Jake operated the drilling equipment on asteroid 749. The work was dangerous and required constant focus, but his mind kept drifting back to the alien woman. Who was she, and why was she following him? He was nobody special, just another human trying to make enough credits to send money back to Earth, where his younger sister, Amy, was raising 2 kids on her own after her husband died in a transport accident. When Jake returned to the station that evening, he took a different route to his quarters, hoping to avoid another encounter. But as he turned the corner near the recreation deck, there she was again. This time she stood directly in his path, and there was no way to avoid her without being obviously rude. Up close, Jake could see more details about her appearance. Her blue skin had a subtle pattern like scales but smoother, and her fingers were longer than human normal with an extra joint. She was tall, maybe 6 feet, and moved with a grace that seemed almost supernatural, but it was her eyes that held him frozen because they seemed to look through him rather than at him. "Jake Morrison," she said, and her voice sounded like wind chimes mixed with whispers. It was beautiful and unsettling at the same time. "How do you know my name?" Jake asked and took a step back. His hand moved instinctively to the emergency beacon on his belt that all miners carried in case of trouble. The alien woman tilted her head slightly like she was considering how to answer. "I know many things about you," she said. "You work Mining Crew 7 and send half your credits to Earth every month. You have been here for 2 years and 3 months. You drink coffee with sugar but no cream, and you always help others when they need it, even when it costs you time or money. Jake felt his heart racing because everything she said was true, but also creepy as hell that a stranger knew so much about his daily routine. Look, lady, I do not know what you want, but following me around is not okay. If you have business with me, then say it, otherwise I am calling station security. She took a step closer, and Jake noticed she smelled like ozone and something floral he could not identify. My name is Lyra, and I am from the Zilani people, she said. I have traveled very far to find you, Jake Morrison, and I need you to understand that what I am about to tell you will change everything you think you know about why you are here. Before Jake could respond, the station alarm began blaring and red lights flashed in the corridor. All miners report to emergency stations, came the automated voice over the speakers. Asteroid collision detected in Sector 4 and rescue teams needed immediately. Jake looked at Lyra, then at the flashing lights. He was trained for emergencies and people might need help. Without another word, he ran toward the equipment bay to get his emergency gear, leaving the mysterious alien woman standing alone in the corridor. Jake spent the next 6 hours helping pull injured miners from damaged sections of the station, where debris from the asteroid had punched through the hull. His emergency training kicked in, and he forgot all about Lyra as he carried wounded humans and aliens to the medical bay. The vacuum of space had claimed 3 lives before the emergency shields activated, and Jake felt the familiar weight of loss that came with working in such a dangerous profession. When the all-clear finally sounded, Jake was covered in dust and blood that was not his own. He stumbled toward the decontamination shower, still wearing his emergency suit. His muscles ached, and his head pounded from breathing recycled oxygen for so long. As he stripped off the suit, he noticed his hands were shaking from exhaustion and adrenaline crash. After showering, Jake headed to his quarters, wanting nothing more than to collapse on his narrow bunk and sleep for 12 hours straight. But when he opened his door, Lyra was standing inside his room waiting for him. Jake immediately tensed and reached for the plasma cutter on his belt, before remembering he had left it in the equipment bay. How did you get in here? Jake demanded. His exhaustion turned to anger because this was going too far. Breaking into his private quarters was a serious violation of station rules, and he had every right to call security. Lyra held up her hands in what seemed to be a peaceful gesture. I apologize for the intrusion, but we need to talk, and I was afraid you would avoid me after what happened earlier. The emergency gave me time to think about how to approach this differently. Get out, Jake said firmly. I do not care what you want or why you are stalking me, but you need to leave right now or I am calling security and having you thrown off this station. Please just give me 5 minutes, Lyra said, and her purple eyes seemed to glow brighter with emotion. I have come across 3 star systems to find you because you did something 6 months ago that changed my life forever. If after 5 minutes you still want me to leave, then I will go and never bother you again. Jake was too tired to fight and honestly curious despite his anger. He sat down heavily on his bunk and pointed at the single chair in his small room. 5 minutes starting now, he said. Lyra sat down and pulled out a small holographic projector from her pocket. She activated it, and an image appeared in the air, between them showing a mining transport crashed into an asteroid. Jake recognized it immediately as the accident from 6 months ago, when a navigation system failed and sent a transport full of workers straight into asteroid 523 at full speed. You were off duty that day, but you heard the distress call and took the emergency shuttle to help, Lyra said. The hologram shifted to show footage from someone's helmet camera. In the shaky video, Jake saw himself pulling survivors from twisted metal and carrying them to safety. I remember that day, Jake said quietly. 23 people were on that transport and we saved 19 of them. It was one of the worst accidents in station history. Lyra touched the projector and the image zoomed in on one particular rescue. Jake watched himself pulling a small figure from underneath a collapsed beam. The person was covered in so much dust and blood that their features were completely obscured. Jake remembered that rescue because he had given the victim his own emergency oxygen mask when theirs failed and had nearly passed out carrying them to the medical shuttle. That was my daughter Kira, Lyra said, and tears that looked like liquid silver ran down her blue cheeks. She is 8 years old and was traveling with her tutor to meet me on Station Beta 7 when the accident happened. The doctors told me she would have died in minutes if you had not found her and shared your oxygen. Jake stared at the hologram, in shock. He had never known the identity of the people he helped that day because the medical teams took over once he got them to safety. He had just done what needed to be done and moved on to the next person who needed help. Your daughter is alive, then? Jake asked because he remembered how badly injured some of the victims had been. Lyra smiled and switched the hologram to show a young Zalani girl with bright purple eyes and blue skin playing with what looked like a floating crystal puzzle. She recovered completely thanks to you, and she asks every day when she can meet the human who saved her life. That is why I have been following you, because among my people a life debt is the most sacred bond that exists. I was just doing my job, Jake said uncomfortably. Any miner would have done the same thing in that situation. We look out for each other out here because space will kill you fast if you are alone. That is exactly the point, Lyra said, and leaned forward intensely. My people have been watching humanity since you achieved faster than light travel. Many species think you are too violent and primitive to trust with advanced technology. But what you did that day proved something important about humans that my government needs to understand. Jake rubbed his tired eyes trying to process what Lyra was saying. So you followed me around for 3 days because I saved your kid 6 months ago. A simple thank you would have been fine, you know. Lyra stood up and walked to the small window that looked out at the stars. There is more, Jake Morrison, and this is why I had to observe you first to make sure you were the right person. My people are facing extinction from a genetic disease that appeared in our population 50 years ago. Our birth rate has dropped by 90%, and our scientists estimate we have perhaps 30 years before we can no longer sustain our civilization. Jake felt his anger fading as he realized this was about more than just gratitude. What does that have to do with me or humans in general? He asked. Lyra turned back to face him and pulled out a datapad. Our geneticists have discovered that human DNA contains sequences that might be the key to developing a cure, but my government is afraid to approach Earth officially because they believe humans will exploit our desperation and demand our technology in exchange for help. So you want me to do what exactly? Jake asked, even though he was starting to guess where this was going. I want you to be proof that humans can act selflessly, Lyra said. You saved my daughter without knowing who she was or what species she belonged to. You gave her your own oxygen without calculating the risk to yourself. If someone like you could speak to our council and show them that humanity has compassion, without conditions, then maybe we can build a partnership based on trust instead of fear. Jake sat in silence for a long moment thinking about what Lyra had asked him to do. He was just a miner who had grown up poor on Earth and joined the space program because it was the only way to make real money to support his sister Amy and her kids. He had no training in diplomacy or public speaking, and the thought of addressing an alien council made his stomach turn with anxiety. Why me? Jake finally asked. There must be thousands of humans who have helped aliens over the years since first contact. I am not special or important enough for something like this. Lyra sat back down and showed him another hologram, this time of Jake over the past few days. That is why I watched you before approaching you directly. I needed to see if the man who saved Kira was the same in his daily life, or if it was just a moment of heroism. I saw you help an elderly human carry heavy supplies to his quarters and refuse payment. I watched you buy food for a young miner who lost his credits gambling and was too proud to ask for help. You fixed broken equipment for free when you could have charged for repairs. Those are just normal things, Jake protested. People help each other on mining stations because we all know how hard life is out here. Exactly, Lyra said with excitement in her voice. You see these acts as normal, but many species, including mine, have forgotten this simple kindness. We have become so focused on advancement and survival that we lost the ability to help without calculating benefit. Humans are new to the galaxy, but you bring something we desperately need to remember. Jake stood up and paced his small room, which only took 3 steps in each direction. Even if I agreed to this, what would happen to my job here? I cannot just leave for weeks or months because I need the credits for my family. Amy is counting on me to help pay for her kids to go to school. Lyra reached into her pocket and pulled out a crystal that glowed with internal fire like a captured star. This contains the coordinates to a planet my people discovered, but kept secret. It has deposits of trilithium and rare elements worth more than you could earn in 10 lifetimes of mining. Whether you help us or not, this is yours as payment for saving Kira. Jake stared at the crystal but did not take it. That feels like a bribe, he said. It is not, Lyra assured him. This is separate from my request. The life debt must be paid according to our customs, and this is my payment. What I am asking you to do for my people is your choice alone with no obligation. Jake picked up the crystal and felt its warmth pulse against his palm. How long would I be gone, and what exactly would I have to do? Lyra smiled, knowing she was close to convincing him. 3 weeks to travel to my home world, and perhaps a week there to meet with the council and our scientists. You would simply tell your story and answer their questions about humanity. Show them that your species acts from compassion, not just calculation. Then I would bring you back here and you could decide what to do with the information in that crystal. Jake thought about all the times he had wished for a chance to change his life and help his family escape poverty. This was that chance dropped, literally into his lap by an alien woman whose daughter he had saved without thinking. The irony was not lost on him that a moment of simple human decency might lead to something extraordinary. When would we leave? Jake asked and saw Lyra's face transform with relief and joy. Tomorrow morning if you are willing. Lyra said, My ship is small but comfortable, and Kira is eager to properly thank the human who saved her life. Jake made his decision the way he always did, by trusting his instincts. Okay, I will come, but I need to arrange things with my supervisor and send a message to my sister first. She will worry if I just disappear. The next morning, Jake stood at docking bay 7 with a small bag containing his few possessions. Lyra waited beside a ship that looked like liquid metal formed into an elegant teardrop shape. Standing beside her was a small Zilani girl with the same blue skin and purple eyes, but filled with the energy and excitement that only children possessed. You are the human who saved me, Kira said in accented English that sounded like bells. Mother said you gave me your breathing mask when mine broke. Jake knelt down to be at eye level with the girl. You were hurt and needed help, he said simply. I'm glad you are okay now. Kira hugged him suddenly, and Jake awkwardly patted her back, not used to displays of emotion from strangers, especially alien children. Thank you, she whispered, and Jake felt something shift in his chest because her gratitude was so pure and genuine. The journey to the Zilani homeworld took exactly 3 weeks as Lyra had promised. During that time, Jake learned basic Zilani language and customs while teaching Kira human card games and telling her stories about Earth. Lyra shared the history of her people and their slow decline from the genetic disease that prevented most couples from having children. When they arrived, Jake gasped at the sight of the planet with its 2 suns and floating cities that looked like giant jellyfish drifting through clouds. The architecture was unlike anything humans had imagined, with buildings that seemed to grow rather than being constructed, and transportation pods that moved through tubes of flowing energy. The council chamber was a sphere of crystal that amplified sound and light in strange ways. 12 Zilani sat in a circle, and Jake stood in the center feeling very small and very human. But when he started talking about the day of the accident and why he had helped without thinking about reward or recognition, his voice grew stronger. He talked about how humans were raised to help neighbors and strangers alike, because anyone could face disaster at any moment. He explained that most humans were not politicians or soldiers, but regular people who wanted to live peacefully and would gladly share knowledge to help cure a disease threatening an entire species. He told them about his sister Amy, raising 2 kids alone, and how humans formed communities to support each other through hardship. When Jake finished speaking, the council was silent for a long moment. Then the eldest member stood and spoke in English. You have shown us something we had forgotten, in our fear and desperation. That help can be given freely without demand for payment, and that strength comes not from technology but from compassion. We will approach Earth with an offer of partnership and medical cooperation based on mutual benefit, not desperation. 3 days later, Jake returned to Mining Station Delta 9 with a treaty proposal for Earth government and enough credits from the crystal coordinates to ensure his family would never struggle again. But more importantly, he carried proof that a single act of human kindness could bridge the gap between species and change the course of galactic history. Jake accepted the position as official liaison, and within a week found himself aboard a Earth diplomatic vessel, heading back to the Zilani homeworld. This time he was not traveling in Lyra's small ship, but in a proper delegation with scientists and diplomats who treated him with a respect that made him uncomfortable. He was still just Jake the miner in his own mind, even if everyone else saw him as the man who changed everything. The journey gave him time to study more about galactic politics, and he learned that the situation was more complicated than he had realized. The Krellians were not the only species watching the Zilani with hungry eyes. At least 3 other aggressive civilizations had been waiting for the Zilani to fall, so they could claim their advanced technology. By helping them recover humanity, had upset a balance of power that had existed for decades. When they arrived at the Zilani homeworld, Jake was surprised to find Lyra waiting for him at the spaceport with tears in her purple eyes. "The genetic treatment is working," she said before he could even say hello. 3 couples have successfully conceived healthy children in the past month. Our scientists say that within a year our birth rate will return to normal levels. Jake felt relief wash over him because part of him had worried the cure might not work, and humanity would be blamed for giving false hope. "That is amazing news," he said. "But something tells me you did not come here just to share good news." Lyra's expression darkened as she led him to a private room away from the other diplomats. "The Krellians have been building alliances with other, aggressive species. They are spreading propaganda that humans are too dangerous to be allowed in galactic society. They claim you manipulated us while we were weak and that the alliance is actually human colonization in disguise." Jake sat down heavily in a chair that adjusted automatically to his human proportions. "So, they are trying to turn the galaxy against us before we can establish ourselves." "Smart move, actually. There is more," Lyra said. "They have demanded the Galactic Council hold a hearing about humanity's rapid expansion and our alliance. If the Council rules against you, then Earth could be placed under quarantine, which would cut you off from all trade and technology exchange." Jake ran his hands through his hair, thinking about the implications. His simple act of saving a child had snowballed into a political crisis that could isolate humanity, just as they were beginning to explore. 6 months had passed since Jake returned from the Zilani homeworld, and everything had changed at Mining Station Delta 9. The treaty between Earth and the Zilani had been signed 2 months ago, and human medical researchers were already working with Zilani scientists to develop a cure for their genetic disease. Jake had become famous throughout human space as the miner who built the bridge between species, though he still worked his regular shifts because he did not know what else to do with himself. The credits from the crystal coordinates had made Jake wealthy beyond imagination, but he had only used enough to buy a house on Earth for Amy and her kids and set up education funds for their future. The rest sat in his account untouched because Jake had learned long ago that money did not automatically bring happiness or purpose. He was eating lunch alone in the cafeteria when Carlos sat down across from him with a worried expression. "Jake, we have a problem, and I think it involves your alien friends." Jake looked up from his sandwich, immediately alert. "What kind of problem?" "3 ships arrived this morning from the Krellian Empire," Carlos said quietly. "They are asking questions about you and the Zilani, and they do not seem happy about the alliance. Security is trying to keep them contained in the visitor section, but these guys are military, not traders." Jake knew about the Krellians from his time with Lyra. They were an aggressive species that had tried to conquer the Zilani decades ago, but failed because of the Zilani's superior defensive technology. The Krellians had been waiting for the Zilani to weaken from their genetic disease before trying again. Before Jake could respond, his communicator buzzed with a message from Lyra. She had given him the device before he left, and they had stayed in contact, sharing updates about the medical research and Kira's recovery. But this message was different, just 2 words that made his blood run cold. "They know." Jake stood up quickly and Carlos grabbed his arm. "Where are you going, man? You cannot take on the Krellians by yourself." "I am not going to fight anyone," Jake said. "But I need to find out what they want before someone gets hurt." Jake found the Krellians in the visitor section, 3 of them standing near the observation deck. They were tall, maybe 7 feet, with gray skin that looked like leather, and forearms that ended in clawed hands. Their eyes were black with no whites, and their mouths had too many teeth. They wore military uniforms with weapons that security had apparently allowed them to keep, which was a bad sign. The leader turned as Jake approached and smiled in a way that was definitely not friendly. "So you are the human who convinced the Zilani to trust your species. You have complicated our plan significantly." Jake kept his distance but stood his ground. "The Zilani are free to make alliances with whoever they choose. If you have a problem with that, then take it up with the Galactic Council, not with me." The Krellian laughed, and it sounded like grinding metal. "The Council does not care what happens in the outer territories as long as trade continues. We waited 40 years for the Zilani to weaken enough for conquest, and now you have given them hope and healing. That was a mistake, human." Jake felt his anger rising but kept his voice calm. "So you plan to invade a dying species and take their technology. That makes you parasites, not conquerors. At least have the courage to admit what you really are." Other two Krellians moved forward, but their leader held up one of his 4 hands to stop them. "Careful with your words, human. Your species is young and weak. Without the Zilani protection, you would be easy prey for many civilizations." "Maybe," Jake said, "but here is something you should understand about humans. We do not abandon our friends, and we definitely do not let bullies threaten them. You want to hurt the Zilani, then you go through us first." The Krellian leader stepped closer, and Jake could smell something like sulfur and rotting meat. "You think your single planet with its primitive weapons could stand against the Krellian Empire? You would be destroyed in days." Jake smiled and pulled out his communicator. "Want to test that theory? Because right now I have a direct line to both Earth Military Command and the Zilani Defense Force. One word from me, and this becomes an interstellar incident that nobody wants." It was a bluff, mostly because Jake had no idea if anyone would actually respond to his call, but he had learned from watching Lyra that sometimes confidence was more important than actual strength. The Krellians did not know how much influence he really had, and that uncertainty was his only weapon. The standoff lasted for 30 seconds, that felt like hours, before the Krellian leader stepped back. "You have made an enemy today, human. The Zilani will not always be there to protect you." Jake kept his expression neutral even though his heart was racing. "And you have learned that humans do not back down from threats. Leave this station and do not come back. The Zilani are under our protection now, and that means something." The Krellians left without another word, but Jake knew this was not over. He immediately sent messages to Lyra and to his contact at Earth Military Command explaining what had happened. Within an hour, 2 Earth patrol ships arrived at the station, and the Krellians were gone. That night, Jake could not sleep thinking about what he had started. By helping the Zilani, he had made humanity a target for other aggressive species. But he also knew he would make the same choice again, because that was what humans did. They stood up for others even when it was dangerous. His communicator buzzed with a video message from Kira. The young Zilani girl was smiling and holding up a drawing she had made of Jake, standing between Earth and her planet like a bridge. "Thank you for protecting us again," she said in her musical voice. "Mother says you are the bravest human in the galaxy." Jake smiled at the drawing and felt the weight on his shoulders lighten slightly. Maybe he had put humanity at risk, but he had also shown the galaxy that humans would fight for their friends. That reputation might be worth more than any weapon or technology. The next morning, station security informed Jake that the Earth government wanted to offer him an official position as liaison between humans and the Zilani. It would mean leaving, mining behind, and becoming a diplomat, something Jake had never imagined for himself. But after facing down the Krellians, he realized that ordinary humans like him might be exactly what the galaxy needed. Jake sent a message to Amy telling her about the job offer and asking her opinion. Her response was simple and perfect. "You saved a little girl, and now you are saving her entire species. Mom and Dad would be so proud. Take the job and show them what humans are really made of."